Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. My name is Monomythical. When Phase 4 of the MCU kicked off last year, I had high hopes that Disney and Marvel would be taking the series in a new direction. However, it quickly became apparent that something was off. Critically, this new phase of stories has been a series of missteps in more ways than one, and with time, the problems with Marvel's newest films and shows have continued to pummel me with disappointment. Allow me to explain. WandaVision started off great, but quickly fell victim to a game of bait and switch with its audience via hype generation with lackluster payoffs. Falcon and the Winter Soldier was a confused and contrived show that left the characters almost exactly where they began. Black Widow should have been released sooner and honestly didn't justify its own existence. Loki retconned the entire lore of the MCU so that every decision ever made was according to Kang's plan, invalidating the concept of free will. Shang-Chi was a deceptive and competent film thanks to its excellent choreography, but ended up having a lackluster story that fell victim to plot contrivances and the typical MCU formula. Eternals was an unfocused mess that deserved to be a show, unlike Hawkeye and Moon Knight, which felt like they were padding for time until they reached the finale, which in both cases was incredibly flat. What If had some great concepts, but lost so much of its tension because of the misuse of humor. I'm looking at you, Zombies episode, and overall incredibly exaggerated nature of its characters' abilities and limits. Doctor Strange was flashy and stylistic, but was devoid of logic in some scenes. Though I will say No Way Home was pretty good upon first watch, and though it was far from perfect, I'm sorry, I think it's the strongest offering from this phase. Wow, I did that in one take. That's pretty damn impressive. Oh yeah, and there's Miss Marvel, which I haven't finished at the time of writing this, but from what I've seen, it was decent until the end of the first episode, and after that really lost me. I only watched up to the second episode, so I don't really know anything about the show, so there you go. And now we've reached the next entry into the phase of mediocrity. Taika Waititi's Thor: Love and Thunder. I'm sure if you're watching this video, you're probably aware of the critical consensus on it or watched some reviews, so you know where this is going. Hell, if you've read the title or picked up on the point of the rant I went on earlier, then you most definitely know where this is going. Yeah, it wasn't very good. I'll start with my spoiler-free opinion. I thought it was pretty subpar, though right in line with the quality of the rest of this phase. For me, the strongest part of the movie was the villain, Gorr the God Butcher, and I instantly was infatuated with his character in the first scene he was in. It really sucks that the movie then doesn't really do much with him. Otherwise, the rest of the cast is fine, not great, but not horrible or anything like that. One thing I want to note before we get into spoilers is what my viewing experience was like. The audience in my theater was quiet through most of it. The jokes didn't seem to land, and I honestly didn't find it all that funny. It's especially sad when you consider that Taika Waititi said this would be even funnier than Ragnarok. Besides that, there really isn't anything noteworthy to say about my experience, so let's just start dissecting this beast and get into spoilers. So if you haven't seen the movie and care about spoilers, then this is the part where you probably might want to consider turning away. Don't worry, I'll be here after you see the film. I mean, assuming you do want to see the film and haven't lost all interest in the MCU. Also, keep in mind there may be spoilers in the comments. I often see a lot of people talking about films in detail when I scroll through YouTube comments sections, and every once in a while someone has a film spoiled for them because of it. Since this video contains spoilers, I cannot control that here, so be warned. Alright, with that said, let's get into this. It can be very easy to be negative or overcritical of films that have genuine issues or that we hate. But even the most flawed film has something positive about it, even if it's as minute as one good delivery of a line by an actor. Luckily, Thor: Love and Thunder does quite a few things well. Like I said in the spoiler-free portion of this video, the strongest part of this film is the main antagonist, Gorr, played by Christian Bale. The film opens with a scene of he and his daughter dying of thirst on some desert world as he begs the gods for a miracle. However, his prayers go unanswered, and though he watches the light drain from his daughter's eyes, he remains resolute in his faith. This very brief scene is among the strongest of the film, and take that as you will, it says so much about him as a person and his love for his daughter as he prays for her survival over his own. So when he inevitably turns to evil after the god he praised casts him aside, you can understand where he's coming from. A broken father, vengeful for the inconsiderate loss of life of someone he loves, someone he cradled from birth, takes up arms to inflict cruel and almost justifiable judgment on those who neglected to intervene. It's some pretty powerful stuff. A bit deceptive of the quality of the rest of the film, but still a strong opening nonetheless. Anyway, Bale's acting is honestly incredible. He really sells the delusion of a broken man who is on a quest for vengeance. Almost every scene he was in made the movie-going experience a bit more bearable, for lack of a better word. It definitely was underutilized and could have been further explored to really sell his motivation, but what we have to work with is passable. The scene in the Shadow Realm was cool too, being in grayscale and all. I thought it was a nice touch to include that, though it might have been more about style over substance. Also, Chris Hemsworth did a fine job as Thor. By this point he knows the character inside and out, even if the script doesn't always do his character justice. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Look, I don't hate this film, but there are a lot of issues with it. Let's start with the point of it, the romance. It's not that good. Because the movie is so damn fast and has an unusually short runtime, it doesn't really give enough time to Thor and Jane to develop that relationship. They share one scene together when they meet, and then after that, most of their dialogue occurs when they are surrounded by other characters. Then the movie sort of forgets that entirely while they are in Omnipotent City, only to awkwardly thrust them together for a romantic scene on the boat as they travel to the Shadow Realm. I know they both harbored feelings after they broke up, but it felt rushed and unearned when they kissed again. Other than sharing a little bit of insight into their pasts and also adding some unnecessarily timed quips, Valkyrie and Korg didn't really do very much in the film, other than to have fake-out deaths that lead them to be sidelined for the final act. Surprisingly, the filmmakers didn't replace Thor with Jane as the Mighty Thor, but chose to kill her off at the end. While I appreciate the diversion from the comic lore for once, it made me wonder what the point of the story was. If the central message is to find oneself, then what is Thor's arc? He spends the story growing close to someone, only for them to be taken away from him. If it weren't for the responsibility to care for Gorr's daughter, who's to say he wouldn't fall back in depression after this? Jane as the Mighty Thor felt very forced, especially when you consider that her using Mjolnir condemned her to death even sooner. If the hammer was supposed to protect her, why did it accelerate her cancer? Jane's sacrifice at the end to take up the mantle and become Mighty Thor for the final battle was fine, but I feel like the film needed to establish a motive for her to do so beyond love. I get it is a central theme of the movie, but themes aren't just calling cards for character decisions. They're supposed to be uniting ideas that are interwoven into a script. To say that theme is the reason beyond something happening still requires world logic to back it up. Otherwise, most of the other characters were pretty one-note, bland, and uninteresting. An issue I have is that besides Gorr, everyone is playing the role of comic relief. Ragnarok suffers from this too. There isn't a consistently serious character who anchors the narrative in reality, causing a serious loss of tension in many scenes. In fact, in almost every scene, someone is trying to force a joke, regardless of whether it maligns the integrity of the characters in it. Actually, that brings up what I think is this movie's biggest crutch. Thor: Love and Thunder is really not that funny, and that pains me. When a director promises you that the sequel to a well-beloved film that was already pretty funny will be even funnier, it really hurts you when you walk out feeling like you've been deceived. The humor in Thor Love and Thunder is dry, irritating, and poorly timed. Take the scene where Jane is talking to Darcy about her cancer diagnosis. She laughs off the fact that it is stage 4, countering her friend's genuine concerns with a joke so bad it made me cringe. She, a doctor, mind you, jokes about how stage 4 isn't the worst stage of cancer. Why is this a problem and not just an innocent joke? As I said earlier, it comes at the expense of character. Jane is a doctor, so obviously she knows that stage 4 is when the cancer is at its worst. Then why would she ever say something like this? The answer is shockingly simple. Because it's funny. At least maybe to the director or the writers it is. Another thing that bothered me was how the film's humor inadvertently disrespected the previous events of the MCU. New Asgard basically became a tourist attraction after Endgame. The cliff edge where Odin established the land as a safe haven for their people became a golf course. The streets were littered with tourist traps and shops, among them an ice cream store called, get ready for this, Infinity Cones. You know, for a race of people to proudly show off such an attraction despite half of their people being massacred pre-snap by Thanos when he only had the Power Stone seems a bit messed up. It's like the film is desperately trying to make you laugh at cheap gags, whether it be decisive meta jabs at past events or characters making childish quips to bring down the stakes of their present situation. After all that effort, it's just not that funny. And so lies my main criticism of this film. Sure, it's far from the film's only problems, chief among them being the janky pacing that moves at breakneck speed through some sequences, and then unnecessarily drags out others only so the characters can make a bunch of jokes. The film is also poorly written. There are numerous plot conveniences, such as the protagonist's ability to travel wherever they want with Stormbreaker, or without it, and an equally concerning amount of plot contrivances, namely, why Thor didn't use Stormbreaker to reach eternity before Gorr to wish him away as soon as he learned that's where he was headed. Actually, come to think of it, that raises major questions for the previous entries in the MCU. Why hasn't Thor gone to eternity sooner, especially since he knew about it before this film? Recall that Thor told the others about eternity's existence, and we don't see him learn about it in this film. For all we know, this could have been knowledge he has known of for years, legend or not. Because Stormbreaker can allow the wielder to navigate through the Bifrost, why not use it to reach eternity and wish Thanos out of existence instead of going to Wakanda? And even if he didn't, Thor survived the snap with Stormbreaker intact and had 5 years before the Avengers decided to do the time heist. There's literally no excuse for him not to use the Eternity to undo the snap. This would make even more sense once you realize that Thanos literally destroys the stones 2 days after the events of Infinity War, allowing whatever Thor would wish to be permanent and preventing anyone from undoing it. It makes you wonder why he continued to mope about, turn to alcoholism, and delve into a deep depression instead of being proactive about fixing what Thanos did to them. Now obviously this is because Eternity was introduced post-Endgame, so it was probably not on the radar of the Russo brothers or maybe even Kevin Feige himself when they were at that point. However, a hole in the plot as massive as this brings up a very important question, one that I think warrants attention. Let's bring this roundabout discussion together to address how this film and the other projects in Phase 4 could be more hurtful to the MCU than beneficial. I could rattle on about Thor 4's issues all day, but I think it's time we bring this all together. Part of what made the MCU so compelling was its world, or rather, what happened in it. Kevin Feige and all those who oversaw the direction this series had taken excelled at making every project feel like a united part of a greater universe. Admittedly, the world of the MCU was interesting based on the merit that every new story and its characters had a place in a greater narrative of facing evil foes like Thanos, and not because the world itself was actually anything special. Regardless, this led to bursts of excited energy in the form of theories and speculations about future projects, since everything was building towards a penultimate climax. Since Endgame, however, much of that energy has been lost. Now we know it can be done. We've seen the Endgame. Even though it wasn't the end, it was treated as such by the characters and hyped up that way in the trailers. No matter how hard you try, you can't build that level of hype again by using the same old recycled formula of post-credit scenes teasing new films, with the occasional cameo or Avengers-level event topping off each phase. At least, not if you expect to have the same result. When viewers saw the original Avengers, they were teased that Thanos would be coming. This took more than 5 years to transpire, but the build-up was there because it hadn't been done to this scale in cinema before. The MCU changed how movies were made. Say what you will about how the quality of phases 2 and 3 stacks up now, they expanded upon the foundation of the first phase and placed their characters in new situations that challenged their beliefs and preconceived notions. The universe grew with them and accommodated new characters to fill in their team. Also, if we ignore the events of Captain Marvel, new characters grew out of the things that happened in Phase 1, explaining why they weren't involved in the Battle of New York. Now that they've all come together for the final battle, what now? Phase 4 lacks the direction of the former phases, but it also seems to be obsessed with building on a universe, even though the world of the MCU itself was never inherently interesting. It was the characters, not the settings that they went to, or the circumstances of what made this world the way it was. Again, the build-up to Thanos, along with the introduction of new allies to combat him, and the expansion of the Avengers as a result, made the world feel alive and interesting. That's why reveals like Kang controlling everybody's decisions, the existence of the Eternals in and of itself, and Thor knowing about a solution to this snap via eternity seem incredibly lackluster in comparison. I know this sounds negative, especially coming from someone who used to be excited for every new Marvel film. Nowadays, though, I can't lie to myself any longer. The time of the MCU is past, and stories lose their magic when they are oversaturated. Just look at Star Wars, for an example. The further you build on a universe, the more vulnerable it becomes to plot contrivances and weaknesses in writing, especially when so many different hands play a role in the creation of new content. But regardless of that, it doesn't make these stories any less vulnerable to scrutiny. I want to stress something before I close. If you like the direction the MCU is taking in this new era of storytelling, that's great. I wish I was able to share your sentiments, and I'm honestly envious of you. Every viewer has the right to like or dislike the content they consume. However, that doesn't change whether the content itself is objectively well made. For instance, if the production value is high, the directing is proficient, the performances given by actors are immersive, the cinematography is intentional, the special effects are convincing, and lastly, but maybe most importantly, the writing is strong. Opinion is outside of objective scrutiny, which is why I can say that Thor: Love and Thunder is far from a perfect film, like it or not. That doesn't mean it cannot be enjoyed or that it lacks good qualities, but it is simply not a cohesive film. Let me make this clear. I don't hate this movie. It's among the less offensive projects to come out of the MCU in the past 2 years. I mean, as long as we exclude the whole issue I discussed with Eternity, it really doesn't disrupt very much outside of character. However, I have serious issues with the implications it has for the future of what used to be a well-received and beloved film franchise. The superhero genre is not what it once was, which might be why shows like Invincible or The Boys have not only been so successful, but have also garnered so much praise. If you are like me and you're completely burnt out of this genre right now, I highly recommend watching both of these shows. They each have a few issues, and I'd like to cover them separately when I have the time, but The Boys especially was riveting and very personal on a character level, and just honestly refreshing. It was enjoyable to watch every episode, and I looked forward to seeing Season 3 all the way through. Invincible was fine too. It's not perfect, but I definitely got a kick out of it, so again, I highly recommend them. You should definitely check them out if you can, and you have access to Amazon Prime, so there you go. Going forward, my expectations for the MCU might be lower than they were before, but I'm not yet ready to walk away from this franchise. I'm still a fan, just not as invested as I used to be. I'm happy that so many viewers can remain optimistic about the newest content, but it's just simply not for me. If you are one of those viewers, or even if you aren't, tell me in the comments down below. I'd love to hear your thoughts and engage in civil discussions with you. Also, if you like what you saw, then maybe consider subscribing. It really means a lot. Regardless for what the future holds, we still have a fairly strong story in the films of the Infinity Saga which will remain timeless for years to come. Even if the newest projects continue to be letdowns, the legacy of Phases 1, 2, and 3 will always have a lasting impact on its viewers, young and old. With that being said, this has been Monomythical, signing off.